My name is Evelyn Carter. And the morning after my divorce, my ex-husband screamed into the phone like a man who had just lost everything. What did you do to my accounts? I stood in my new half-empty apartment, sunlight cutting across the floor, my phone pressed calmly to my ear. I didn't do anything, Mark, I said. I just stopped doing everything. And for the first time in 12 years, he finally understood what that meant. The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when he decided to humiliate me. We were sitting across from each other in the conference room, neutral walls, polished table, a clock that ticked louder than it should have. My attorney had already stepped out to give us a moment, which, in hindsight, was a mistake. Mark leaned back in his chair, loosening his tie like he'd just closed a successful deal instead of ending a marriage. Then he reached into his wallet. I remember the way he held the card between two fingers like it was something disposable, like I was. He flicked it across the table toward me. It slid slow and deliberate, stopping right in front of my hand. 20,000, he said, almost bored. That's more than enough for someone like you. Someone like you. Not Evelyn, not his wife of 12 years. Just someone. I didn't touch the card. I looked at it, then at him. Mark didn't even meet my eyes. He was already checking his phone, probably responding to emails, already moving on. He always moved on quickly. That was part of how he'd built his success. No attachment, no hesitation, no looking back. Take it, he added. You'll need it. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so perfectly predictable. For 12 years, Mark had believed one thing about me. That I didn't understand money. That I didn't understand numbers. That I didn't understand anything that actually mattered. You wouldn't get it, he used to say whenever I asked about investments. Just stick to groceries, Ev. I handle the real money. And for years I let him believe that. Because it was easier. Because arguing with him was like talking to a wall that occasionally mocked you back. Because every time I tried to explain something simple, something logical, he'd smile that tight, patronizing smile and say, "You're overthinking it." Or worse. That's not how the real world works. The real world. As if I hadn't been living in it the entire time, just in a different role. What he never understood, what he never even considered, was that while he was out there making money, I was the one making sure it didn't disappear. I was the one who tracked every expense. Every bill. Every subscription. Every tax document. Every automatic payment. Every late fee we never had to pay. Every audit we never had to fear. I built the system. He just took credit for it. But in his mind, I was still the woman who needed a weekly allowance. Yes, an allowance. Every Friday, like clockwork, he'd transfer money into what he called my spending account. Don't go overboard, he'd say, half joking, half not. And I'd nod. Because it wasn't worth the fight. Because I had already learned something about Mark that took me years to fully accept. He didn't just want control. He needed to feel superior. And the easiest way to do that was to make sure I felt smaller. The prenup had sealed that dynamic long before the divorce ever did. I still remember the night he brought it up. We were engaged, sitting in his apartment, takeout containers on the coffee table. He slid the document toward me like it was just another formality. It's standard, he said, nothing personal. But it was personal. It said that his business, his investments, his assets would remain his. That in the event of a divorce, I would leave with what was fairly mine. At the time, I thought that sounded reasonable. At the time, I believed we were building something together. I signed it. Not because I was naive, but because I trusted him. That was my first mistake. Over the years, that prenup became his quiet confidence. His safety net. His unspoken threat. If anything ever happens, he once said during an argument, you'll be fine. You'll walk away with enough. Enough. That word again. Enough to survive. Not enough to matter. And now, sitting across from him in that conference room with a plastic card on the table between us, I realized something. He still believed the same story. That I was walking away with nothing. That he was the one in control. That he was the one who had won. I picked up the card. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted him to believe I did. Thank you, I said, my voice steady. He gave a short nod, satisfied, already done with the conversation. Already done with me. I stood up, slipping the card into my bag. No argument. No scene. No emotion. Just silence. That was the part that always confused him. He never understood my silence. He thought it meant weakness. He thought it meant agreement. He thought it meant he had the final word. He was wrong. Because silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's just the moment before everything changes. I walked out of that building without looking back. The air outside felt different, lighter, colder. Real. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my reflection staring back at me in the rearview mirror. For 12 years I had played a role. The agreeable wife. The supportive partner. The woman who didn't understand. And now, I didn't have to play that role anymore. I reached into my bag and took out the card. Turned it over in my fingers. $20,000. More than enough. I smiled just slightly. Then I started the engine. And drove straight to the bank. Because Mark had made one critical mistake. He thought money was power. But he never understood the system behind it. And he definitely never realized who had built it. The bank opened at 9. I was there at 8:52. Not pacing, not anxious, just early. That was something Mark never noticed about me. He thought I was passive because I didn't react quickly. He mistook patience for indecision. In reality, I just didn't move until I was ready. And this time I was. The glass doors slid open exactly on time. I stepped inside the quiet hum of the lobby wrapping around me, soft conversations, keyboards, clicking the low murmur of a printer somewhere behind the counters. Familiar sounds. I had been here dozens of times over the years. Not with Mark, he never came in person unless something was wrong, but alone handling things he didn't think required his attention. Deposits, verifications, documents. Details. Always the details. A young associate greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning. How can I help you today?" "I need to review my accounts," I said. "All of them." She nodded, professional, unassuming. "Of course. Do you have an appointment?" "I don't," I said. "But I believe I'm listed as a joint account holder on several accounts under Mark Carter." Her expression shifted just slightly. Recognition, maybe. Or just the awareness that this wasn't a routine request. "Let me check that for you." A few minutes later, I was sitting in a private office with a senior banker named Daniel. Mid-40s. Calm, experienced. The kind of man who had seen enough to know when something wasn't simple. He glanced at his screen, then back at me. "You are indeed listed as a joint account holder on the primary checking account, 2 savings accounts, and the brokerage-linked account," he said. I nodded. Of course I was. I had set them up. Years ago, when Mark's business started growing faster than he could manage, I had organized everything streamlined. The accounts, linked the payments, built a system that kept things running without constant oversight. He had signed whatever I put in front of him back then. Trusted me, back when it was convenient. Daniel continued, "How would you like to proceed?" I folded my hands in my lap, steady. "I need to place a temporary freeze on the accounts." He didn't react immediately. That was a good sign. "May I ask the reason?" he said. "Yes," I replied. "There have been irregular transactions. I want to review activity and prevent further movement until everything is verified." It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole story. He nodded slowly. "That is within your rights as a joint account holder." Of course it was. I had made sure of that years ago. Once the freeze is in place, I added, "I also want to suspend all automatic payments and disconnect any linked external cards." That got a reaction. Subtle, professional, but there. "That will disrupt ongoing transactions," he said carefully. "I understand." I held his gaze. "I'm requesting it anyway." There was a brief pause. Then he nodded. "All right." He turned back to his computer fingers, moving across the keyboard. Click. Pause. Click. I watched the screen from where I sat, not the details, but the rhythm. The quiet, methodical process of something shifting underneath the surface. This was how power actually worked. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a few precise decisions, in the right place. "Done," Daniel said after a moment. "The accounts are now temporarily frozen. No withdrawals, no transfers, and no automatic payments will process until the hold is lifted." I exhaled slowly. Not relief. Confirmation. "Thank you," I said. "There's one more thing," he added. "There are several authorized users linked to the primary account. Would you like to make any changes there? Yes. Yes, I said, remove all authorized users. He scrolled. There's one in particular with significant activity, he noted. A Margaret Carter. Of course there was. My mother-in-law. Designer stores, spa memberships, weekend trips that appeared on statements as casually as grocery bills. Expenses Mark never questioned. Expenses I quietly accounted for, every month. Yes, I said evenly, remove her access. Another series of clicks. It's done. Just like that. Years of unchecked spending, gone in seconds. I stood up, smoothing the front of my coat. That's all I need for now. Daniel gave me a measured look. Not judgmental, just aware. If you need assistance reviewing the transactions, we can help with that, he said. I know, I replied. I offered a small, polite smile. I'll handle it. Because I always had. I walked out of the bank the same way I had walked in, quiet, composed, unnoticed. But everything was different now. Not because I had taken anything. I hadn't transferred a single dollar. Hadn't touched his money. Hadn't broken a single rule. All I had done was pause the system. The system I built. The system he never understood. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. No messages. No calls. Not yet. It would take a few hours. Maybe less. A declined transaction here. A failed payment there. A notification he wouldn't understand. At first. But then, it would escalate. Because Mark didn't check details. He reacted to disruption. And I had just disrupted everything. I started the engine, pulling out of the parking lot with steady hands. By the time I reached the end of the street, my phone buzzed. Once. Twice. 3 times. I glanced at the screen. Mark. I let it ring. A minute later it buzzed again. Then again. Then a message. What did you do? I didn't respond. Not yet. Because this wasn't about a conversation. It was about a realization. And realizations don't happen all at once. They unfold. Slowly. Uncomfortably. I drove home, parked, and walked inside my apartment. The space was still mostly empty, just a couch, a table, a few boxes stacked against the wall. A beginning. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. Evelyn. His voice was tight, controlled but barely. What did you do to my accounts? Straight to it. No greeting. No pretense. I leaned against the kitchen counter, calm. I didn't do anything, I said. A beat of silence. Then sharper. My card just got declined. Payments aren't going through. My mom just called me, her card's not working either. What did you do? I closed my eyes for a moment. Not out of stress. Out of clarity. Because right there, in his voice, was something I had never heard before. Uncertainty. I told you, I said quietly. I didn't do anything. Another pause. Then louder. Stop playing games, Evelyn. Games. That was what he thought this was. I opened my eyes, looking out at the empty room around me. No, I said. I just stopped playing mine. Silence. Real silence this time. Heavy. Unfamiliar. And then, what does that even mean? I let the question hang. Because he wasn't asking for an answer. He was asking for control. And for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't giving it to him. Mark always liked an audience. He liked the way people watched him when he spoke, how conversations quieted just a little when he leaned forward, how waiters hovered a second longer at his table, how clients nodded even before he finished a sentence. Control for him wasn't just about money. It was about perception. And that night at a private dining room in downtown Chicago, he had both. Or at least, he thought he did. There were 6 of them at the table. 2 potential investors, 1 senior partner from his firm, a junior associate eager to impress, and Mark at the center of it all, steering the conversation like it was a deal already halfway done. He laughed at the right moments, leaned back at the right time, dropped numbers casually like they didn't matter even though they always did. And when the check came, he didn't hesitate. Of course he didn't. He picked it up before anyone else could even glance at it. Don't worry about it, he said smoothly. It's on me. A gesture he'd repeated 100 times. A gesture that always worked. He handed over his card without looking. Because he never had to. Because in his world, things just went through. The waiter nodded and walked away. The conversation resumed. But only for a moment. Because then the waiter came back. And this time there was something different in his posture. Not obvious, just a slight hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty. He leaned down toward Mark, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry, sir, but the card was declined." It wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. Silence has a way of amplifying everything. Mark blinked once like he hadn't heard correctly. "I'm sorry." The transaction didn't go through. A pause. Then a small, polite smile from the waiter, the kind meant to soften embarrassment. "Would you like to try another card?" Another card. Mark reached for his wallet slower this time. The room had shifted. Subtly, but unmistakably. The senior partner glanced down at his glass. One of the investors adjusted his cufflink. The junior associate suddenly found the tablecloth very interesting. No one said anything, which made it worse. Mark pulled out a second card, handing it over with a tight nod. "Run this one." The waiter did. Left. Came back. Same expression. Same pause. "I'm sorry, sir." This time the silence was heavier. Mark felt it. Of course he did. He straightened in his chair, forcing a short laugh. "Must be a system issue," he said. "Try it again." The waiter didn't argue. But he didn't try again either. "Would you like to use a different form of payment?" A different form. Because now it wasn't about the card. It was about him. Mark's jaw tightened. For a split second, something cracked. Then he reached for his phone. "I'll just take care of it," he muttered, already dialing. My phone rang while I was standing in my kitchen unpacking a box of dishes. I let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. Then I answered. "Evelyn." There was no greeting on his end. No pretense. Just pressure. "What is going on with my accounts?" I set a plate down carefully on the counter. "They're under review," I said. A beat. "What does that mean?" "It means exactly what I said." His breath hitched just slightly. "I'm at a dinner right now," he snapped. "My card isn't working. None of them are working. Fix it." Fix it. The words landed differently now. He wasn't asking. He was expecting. The way he always had. I leaned against the counter, looking out the window. The city was quiet from here, distant, detached. "I can't do that," I said. "What do you mean you can't?" His voice rose sharp. "You set this up. Just undo whatever you did." There it was. Recognition. Not of me, but of my role. I closed my eyes for a second. Because for 12 years that sentence had never been spoken out loud. "You set this up." Now he knew. "I didn't do anything wrong," I said calmly. "I just put a hold on the accounts until everything is verified." "Verified," he repeated, incredulous. "Verified for what?" "For unusual activity." Silence. Then, "What are you talking about?" I let the question sit. Not to provoke him, but because the answer mattered. "There are transactions that need to be reviewed," I said. "That's all." That's all he shot back. "My accounts are frozen, Evelyn. My cards are getting declined in the middle of a client dinner. That's all." I imagined the scene. The table. The eyes on him. The moment of hesitation. And for the first time, I didn't feel small thinking about it. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. He wasn't used to this. Not from me. "Just fix it," he said again, but the edge was different now. Less command, more strain. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I'm not responsible for holding your life together anymore." "But I didn't say that." "Not yet." "Because the system needs to be reviewed properly," I replied. "It wouldn't be responsible to just override it." Responsible. A word he used all the time. Now it sounded different. "You're doing this on purpose," he said, quieter now, controlled but barely. "No," I said, "I'm just not stopping it." That was the truth. And he knew it. Because suddenly everything he had never paid attention to was all he had. The accounts. The payments. The structure. The invisible work that made his life run without friction. Work he had dismissed. Work he had minimized. Work he had never bothered to understand. "Evelyn." My name this time. Not sharp. Not dismissive. Just uncertain. "What exactly did you do?" I opened my eyes, looking down at my hands. Steady. Unaffected. Free. I paused the system, I said. Silence. Then slowly. You can't just do that. I already did. Another silence. But this one felt different. Heavier. Because something had shifted. Not in the accounts. Not in the money. In him. For the first time in years. He wasn't the one in control. And he knew it. Mark didn't sleep that night. I knew because he called 3 times after midnight. The first call was anger. The second was urgency. The third was something else. I didn't answer any of them. Because by then the situation had already moved past emotion. This wasn't about panic anymore. It was about consequences. The next morning I was sitting across from my attorney again. Same building, same polished table. Different atmosphere. This time I wasn't there to end something. I was there to understand what came next. Everything you've done so far is within your legal rights, she said, flipping through a printed summary of account activity. As a joint account holder, you have full authority to request a freeze, especially if you cite irregular transactions. I nodded. I didn't move any funds, I said. I didn't transfer anything out. That matters, she replied. You didn't take, you restricted. There was a difference. A big one. In Mark's world, control meant ownership. In reality, control came from access. And I had just reminded him of that. There's something else, I added. The accounts, they're not exactly clean. She looked up. What do you mean? I slid a folder across the table. Not dramatic, not forceful. Just deliberate. I've been managing the taxes for years, I said. Quarterly estimates, deductions, expense classifications. Her eyes scanned the first few pages. And then she paused. What am I looking at, she asked. Patterns, I said. That was the simplest way to put it. Not fraud. Not exactly. But negligence. Carelessness. The kind that builds slowly, quietly, until one day it doesn't stay quiet anymore. Mark had always believed he was too smart to make mistakes like that. Too careful. Too experienced. But the truth was simpler. He wasn't careful. I was. And the moment I stepped away, the cracks started showing. These deductions, my attorney said, tapping a line on the page, they're aggressive. They were controlled, I replied, when I was monitoring them. She flipped another page. And this? Uncategorized spending, personal expenses running through business accounts. She leaned back slightly. This could trigger an audit. I met her eyes. Yes. The word hung there. Heavy. Real. Because this was the part Mark would never have seen coming. He thought losing access to his accounts was the problem. It wasn't. It was just the beginning. By noon, he was sitting in his own attorney's office. I didn't see it. But I didn't need to. I knew the sequence. The confusion. The frustration. The slow realization that things were more complicated than they looked. Because Mark didn't do details. He delegated them. And now, there was no one left to delegate to. He called again at 2:14 p.m. This time I answered. Evelyn. My name again? Careful. Measured. What's going on with the taxes? Straight to it. So he had figured it out. Faster than I expected. That depends, I said. What did your accountant tell you? A pause. He said there are discrepancies. Of course he did. And he said if they're not corrected, it could lead to issues. Issues. That was a polite way of saying it. I let the silence stretch just long enough. Mark, I said finally, when was the last time you reviewed your own financial records? Another pause. Longer this time. That's not the point. It is the point. My voice didn't rise. Didn't sharpen. It didn't need to. Those issues didn't appear overnight, I continued. They've been there for years. That's not possible, he said quickly. Everything's been fine. Everything's been fine. I almost smiled. Because that sentence was the story of our entire marriage. Things were fine. Because I made them fine. You mean nothing has gone wrong, I said. That's the same thing. No, I replied softly. It isn't. Silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Tighter now. Controlled. Trying to stay ahead of something he didn't fully understand. Just tell me what to do, he said finally. There it was. Not a command. A request. For the first time in 12 years. Just tell me what to do. I closed my eyes for a moment. Because that sentence should have felt satisfying. Victorious. But it didn't. It felt accurate. Like something had finally been named. I'm not your system anymore, Mark, I said. What does that mean? It means I'm not fixing things for you. His tone shifted. Frustration creeping back in. So you're just going to leave it like this? You're going to let everything fall apart? I opened my eyes. Looked around my apartment. At the boxes. The quiet. The space that was finally mine. No, I said. I'm just not holding it together for you. Another pause. And then, that's not fair. Fair. The word landed differently now. Because for years, fairness had only worked one way. I leaned against the table steady. You're right, I said. He exhaled sharply like he thought he'd won something. But I wasn't done. It wasn't fair, I continued. Not when I was doing the work and you were taking the credit. Not when I was managing everything and you called me useless. Silence. Then quieter. That's not what I... It is, I said. Not angry. Just clear. And then I said the thing I had been holding back. Not for revenge. Not for impact. Just because it was true. I didn't take your money, Mark, I said. I took away my labor. The line settled between us. Unmovable. And today I added, you're finally seeing what your life looks like without it. No response. No argument. No defense. Because there wasn't one. For the first time since I had known him, Mark didn't have an answer. 3 weeks later, the calls stopped. Not all at once. Gradually. Like a storm losing strength. At first, Mark still reached out short messages, missed calls, the occasional voicemail that started with control and ended in something closer to confusion. Then fewer. Then none. Because eventually even he understood something had changed. Not temporarily. Permanently. I heard about him through other people. Not gossip. Just fragments. That's how information moves in professional circles, quietly, indirectly wrapped in neutral language that says everything without saying too much. He's restructuring. He's brought in a new accountant. There were some issues with his books. Issues. Always that word. Soft enough to be polite. Heavy enough to carry weight. From what I gathered, he hadn't collapsed. Of course not. Mark was too disciplined for that. Too driven. But things weren't smooth anymore. The systems I had built, automatic, efficient, invisible, had been replaced with something slower, more expensive, more fragile. He had to double-check things now. Had to ask questions. Had to rely on people he didn't fully trust. And worst of all, he had to think about details. His mother didn't adjust as well. I found that out from a mutual acquaintance who mentioned almost casually that Margaret Carter had been cutting back. No more weekly spa visits. No more spontaneous shopping trips. No more quiet charges that disappeared into a system no one questioned. She had called me once. I didn't answer. She left a message. It wasn't angry. That would have been easier. It was confused. I don't understand what's going on, she said. Mark says there's some kind of problem, but this doesn't make any sense. No, it didn't. Because for years nothing had required understanding. It had just worked. As for me, I started small. A desk by the window. A laptop. A stack of notebooks filled with systems I had built over the years, budget frameworks, tracking methods, structures that had once lived quietly inside someone else's life. Now they belonged to me. The first client came through a referral. A woman in her early 40s. 2 kids. Recently separated. She sat across from me at a small table in a quiet cafe, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. I don't even know where to start, she admitted. Her voice was steady, but I recognized the feeling underneath it. That quiet, familiar uncertainty. Not about money. About control. I nodded. You start with what you can see, I said. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I pulled out a notebook, opened it, and turned it toward her. Most people think money is complicated, I said. It's not. What's complicated is not knowing where it's going. She looked down at the page. Lines. Categories. Simple. Clear. Something she could understand. Something she could own. And once you can see it, I continued, you can change it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. Slowly. Like something had just shifted. That was the moment I recognized. Not the numbers. Not the structure. The realization. The same one I had stood on the edge of for years, before I finally stepped into it. That afternoon after she left, I sat alone for a while. The cafe had emptied out, the light had softened. I opened my laptop and created an invoice. Simple. Professional. Clear. For the first time in my life, my name was on it. Not attached to someone else. Not hidden behind a system no one noticed. Mine. I filled in the details. Reviewed it once. Then clicked send. A small action. But it didn't feel small. Because it wasn't about the amount. It was about ownership. Later that evening, I walked back to my apartment. The same space that had once felt empty now felt intentional. Not full. Not finished. But mine. I set my keys down, poured a glass of water, and sat by the window. The city moved below me, steady, indifferent, alive. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it. A number I recognized. Mark. I considered ignoring it. For a moment. Then I answered. Evelyn. His voice was different. Quieter. Not weak. Just measured. I wanted to let you know, he said, everything's been sorted. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. I'm glad. A pause. Then, I didn't realize how much you were doing. There it was. Not an apology. Not exactly. But something close to acknowledgement. Something real. That's okay, I said. Another pause. I mean it, he added. I thought I understood everything. I thought I had control. I looked out at the city lights. You had access, I said. That's not the same thing. He didn't argue. For once. No, he said quietly, it's not. Silence settled between us. Not tense. Not heavy. Just complete. I won't call again, he said after a moment. I know. And I did. Because this wasn't unfinished anymore. It didn't need to be. Take care, Evelyn. You too, Mark. The line went dead. I set my phone down and sat there for a while. Not thinking about him. Not thinking about the past. Just sitting. Because for the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to fix. Nothing left to manage. Nothing left to hold together. Only something to build. Slowly. Carefully. On my terms. I reached for my laptop, opening it again. There was work to do. My work. And this time, I understood exactly what it was worth. If you've ever been underestimated or made to feel like what you do doesn't matter, take a moment and think about this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't taking something back. It's simply stepping away and letting the truth reveal itself. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.